Did you know? You might not be able to survive. Unless you learn to think like a Viking warrior, trudge through snowdrifts in armor and fur, pray to the gods, or at least your toes don't abandon you. Although it didn't help much. The wool is itchy and the fur lining already feels damp. The air in the mountains cuts through layers of things like tearing apart thin paper. Every step forward with the wind. The wind insists that you turn back, but you still keep moving forward. Behind you, the ranks of warriors stretch out like a black snake on the dazzling snow, and their shields wake a soft clicking sound along with their boots. This sound is almost comforting, as if the jingling and scraping sounds mean that you are not alone in this frozen desert. The first thing that impressed you was the heaviness of everything. Your body is not only fighting against the cold, but also against the heavy force. He wore a sword at his waist, a shield on his shoulder, and even thick boots designed to prevent his feet from freezing. Each one increases your weight when you are going uphill. A mainstream fact about these soldiers is that many of them carried about 30 kilograms of equipment during such marches. Not only weapons, but also food, flint, cooking utensils, and sometimes even tools for repairing ship. Tried dragging it up the snow slope. Suddenly, the cold seemed to be only half the problem. However, there are also some almost absurd things here. Something that makes you shake your head. Some materials suggest that the Vikings believed in chewing tree bark. Yes, the bark stripped from birch trees can give them a little energy. Imagine staring at a stick like a frozen beaver, just to keep moving. Despite this, you can still see people tearing at tree bark with their cracked teeth, desperately searching for anything to divert their attention from the bone-chilling air. Although some details are already known, others remain uncertain. Scholars still question whether these people really made meticulous preparations for such an expedition, or if they merely shrugged their shoulders, prayed and threw themselves into the snowstorm. Will they stock up on furs and bacon several weeks in advance? Or is survival more about improvisations, seizing any land and pure stubbornness? What can be provided along the way? The answer lies beneath the snow that has accumulated for hundreds of years. Your senses become acute in this environment. Snow is not as silent as people imagine. It squeaked under your boots, sighing, and gusts of wind blew over the ruts like ghostly flints. The air has the smell of iron, cold and metallic. When you smoke too fast, it will sting your throat. Your nose has grown hair. Scabs have formed at the edges, and you can feel small icicles forming on your beard or eyelashes. One of your comrades minus arms cursed softly, his voice drowned out by the staff wrapped around his mouth. Another person grinned savagely. This was a kind of black humor that prevented one from falling into despair. In your hand, the handle of the axe becomes smooth because of your own grip. The wood was very smooth. After being polished, it is now almost slippery to a dangerous extent. You kept changing it from one glove to another, trying to keep your fingers from freezing stiff. The gloves themselves are made of goatskin, lined with wool, and have a slight smell of smoke and sweat, evoking a warm night by the fireplace. This smell is almost intoxicating here, surrounded by cold snow. You glanced forward and saw the leader raise his arm. The queue came to a halt. Everyone leaned forward slightly, their shoulders rising and falling. Their breaths gushed out in unison like those of a giant beast panting in the cold. Silence fell, except for the sound of the wind. You realize how lonely you are. There were no villages nearby, no inns to hide in, no kind-hearted strangers carrying hot soup. Only mountains, snow and ruthless marching. The strange part, this is not the worst. This is just the greeting card version of winter. Deep in the mountains, the real test awaits us. Avalanches, frozen rivers, and storms that buried the entire path. But now, you're just learning how to survive the first cold handshake of the Viking winter. You raised your boots and stepped hard on the snow, feeling the snow collapse under your heavy pressure. The parade is still ongoing. The shield jingled again. You move forward, knowing that every creak, every cold breath, and every tremble marks the beginning of a long night. The march began again, followed by the steady and hypnotic rhythm of boots stepping on the snow. Each creaking sound is the same, but each time it feels heavier than the last. You notice how the world around you is shrinking. All around is white. A snowstorm was painted on the canvas, blurring the sky and the earth into a merciless scene. Somewhere on the canvas you imagine a horizon, but it's impossible to know where it starts. You walk in a dream, just as if you were in a dream. You keep striving, but you will never approach the end. The snow here is not fluffy. Its packaging is very hard and has scabbed over from the wind, so your boots sometimes sink to a level that could burn your calves. There are also times when the snow has completely melted and you will trip over in the steep snow, pressing and dragging yourself out. The person behind you almost bumped into you, muttering with half a laugh and half a roar, because a single mistake could push over the entire warrior chain like dominoes. At such moments, the shield made a louder noise, and an accidental clatter echoed in the valley. This is a fact that historians have already confirmed. Viking warriors are no strangers to marching on such harsh terrain. Contemporary chronicles describe their battles of crossing mountain passes in Norway, Sweden and even Scotland. They are not merely sea marauders. They also crossed mountains and rivers, often trekking for miles in the desolate snow to ambush settlements or join distant allies. When we imagine the Vikings, think about this. We imagine ships and fjords, but their survival largely depends on these exhausting inland marches. Then, behind this clear-headed fact lies a quirk. It is said that some soldiers tied leather unwrapped bones around their feet and skated on the cold ground. This was a kind of primitive roller skates. When you think of the bearded man sliding down the icy slope like a child, scraping the ice with his skates while holding onto his shield to keep his balance, you find yourself giggling foolishly. This sounds absurd, even funny. However, this is part of the strange tools that keep them moving. However, not all the evidence is very clear. Scholars remain divided on whether the Vikings relied heavily on these improvisations, or whether these stories were merely exaggerations by later storytellers. Does every soldier tie bones to their feet? Or is this just a strange custom in some villages? No one can tell the truth for sure. What you know is that in such cold weather, you would be more than happy to tie the kitchen spoon to your boots if it allows you to slide down instead of sinking. The sound of marching has also become a kind of torture. You can hear the continuous rapid breathing, the occasional coughing turning into chopping sounds, the hollow clanging sound of half an axe hitting the shield. Strangely, you heard the sound of snow. Under the heady pressure of dozens of soldiers, it moved and moaned layer by layer, as if the mountain had been whispering all along, testing how much pressure it could withstand. Your senses will also betray you. In the pale sunlight, the dazzling snow scorched your eyes, making you squint until you had a headache. Several men tied strips of cloth around their faces as temporary snow goggles, with only a few seams on them to reduce the accumulation of snow. You blinked and saw ghostly colors swimming in the brightness. The ghostly blue and purple reminded you of stained glass. But here, there are no churches, only snowfields and boundless skies. The taste is different now. This is not merely the bone-chilling cold, the sweat seeping from the wall, the faint smell of leather, and the pungent odor of pine resin wafting from the distant firs. Every time you inhale, it feels like swallowing a needle, but somehow you get used to it. Your tongue can even taste the dry, bitter and strange air, as if every breath carries the crushed stones blown down from the mountain. There's not Riffin struggling to trudge beside you. His beard was covered with frost, stiffened and glittering in the pale light, as if he were wearing icy jewels. He grinned at you, his teeth shining brightly, and then spat into the snow. Saliva froze almost instantly, and a tiny, shiny bead caught the light and then vanished at the next activation. This little act is both absurd and provocative, as if saying, "I still have warmth to waste." The leader signaled again, pointing at the ridge ahead. The slope rose sharply, and you moaned inside, knowing what it meant. The higher you climb, the stronger the wind will be. Now it whistles, shattering the cape into a broken flag and creaking the shield belt. causing your arms to hurt. Your ears hurt, your cheeks are numb, and even your hair is frozen. You don't know if your eyelashes are stiff due to frost or too tired to lift. However, the march continued. Each step demands less strength and more rhythm, and it is a kind of incantation of movement. You will find yourself humming softly, or even not speaking, just a tone that keeps your steps steady. The others picked up. Soon, an intermittent song began to ring out in the group. It was not cheerful but very down minus to minus earth. This is a voice telling the mountain, we are still here. You realize with aunt fear that this is only the second stage of the journey. The creaking snow, the aching calves, and the cold beard. These are just the first few lines of a long legendary story. Ahead lies a night filled with flames, frostbite and fear. But now, you keep walking, your boots sink, your shields jingle, and the sound hums in the void. You pull the clump tighter, but its fabric will only scratch your neck and shoulders, as if the wool itself is dissatisfied with being asked to keep you warm. This is reality. Each layer is both redemption and distress. The fur itches, the wool rubs, and the leather hardens in the cold until you feel like you're wearing a bark coat. However, without these layers, you would already be a frozen sculpture by the roadside. Animal fur is your most precious shield against the cold. You stroke the wolf-skin draped over your chest with your hand. It felt as if its rough protective fur was still standing up, as if it still remembered this battle itself. Mainstream historical records mention that Viking warriors often wore wool for bare skins, not only for warmth but also as camouflage to symbolize the beasts they worshipped. There is a strange comfort in the thought of being wrapped in the spirit of something that once thrived in the same cold. Nevertheless, there are still some details that are close to being comical. Some legendary stories depict soldiers wearing thick layers of woolen undergarments, swaying like children in snow-proof suits. Some people also suggested that the poor among them stuffed moss or hay in their cloaks to keep warm. Imagine it. The fierce marauders carrying the barn feed made a rustling sound like scarecrows every time they moved. When you change your weight and imagine the squeaking of hay under your corset, you almost laugh. However, historians do not have a consistent view of the uniformity of these methods. Some people believe that the wealthiest soldiers can afford the colorful and finely woven cloaks, while others struggle through the winter in half-minus cold clothes, almost unable to piece together the pieces of the clothes they own. Is the iconic image of the well-minus dressed Vikings applicable to everyone or merely a privilege of the elite? The argument continues, just like the wind brushing against your face. The wind blew through every crevice. No matter how tightly you pull your leather coat, your cold fingers will still slip out of the seams and cuffs poking at your ribs and ankles. You can feel it under your armpits, on your neck and in your boots. This feeling is maddening, as if an invisible hand is testing your defense, whispering you can't escape me. You stomped your feet harder, trying to warm up your blood, even though each stomp sank deeper into the snow. The scent of fur has its own story. Some clothes still carry the musk of animals, earthy and pungent, reminding people that these clothes once had teeth and claws. Some others were giving off a faint smoke, which had been dried up by the fire at home. Strangely enough, the smell makes people feel comfortable. It feels as if a small piece of the whole has been brought into the wilderness. However, wool can retain sweat. It will soon become damp, and when the wind blows in, this dampness turns into a terrifying curse. Beside you, men murmur to themselves. A person was frantically grasping his neck and tearing at the collar of his coat. Another person adjusted the laces of his boots, pulling them tighter in a futile attempt to keep out the cold. You will see a warrior whose cloak is nothing but sewn rabbit skin, thin and torn, but he moves forward with great difficulty without complaint. Perhaps he is too tired and doesn't want to complain. Perhaps he has become numb. Just think about the irony in it. Despite wearing so many clothes, he still feels very naked. The cold doesn't care how many sheets of skin you have piled up. It turns a blind eye to the bones that permeate everything. You remember the warmth of the fields in summer, the feeling of the sun shining on the bare shoulders, and you wonder how such a thing could exist in this world. as impossible, a fantasy of warm, minus-hearted people. Then, in the rhythm of your thoughts, a sensory vibration emerged. The wool on your wrist has frozen, and the stiff little ice ridges have pierced your skin like needles. When you bend your arm, the fabric will crack slightly, just like parchment cracking. You rub your hands together, trying to soften the stiffness, but all you get is friction and stinging. Someone is coughing violently behind you, covered by the fur collar. That voice resounded through the air, emitting a shrill human touch in this inhumane cold. Another soldier smiled and shook his head. "At least you'll keep us awake," he muttered, his voice brimming with irony. Humor has become armor here. Laughter is as indispensable as wool. Each breath causes fog to form on the surface, covering the mouth and condense into tiny ice crystals on the fabric. When you suck too hard, it becomes dry and bitter, just like chewing sheep, and you will taste the flavor of wool fibers. But you still held onto that rough muzzle tightly, for without it, the wind would blow into your lungs and roar. You can't help but think. Every piece of leather and every piece of cloth is your small contract with survival. It may itch and have a smell, but it can make you breathe. In this cold theater, breathing is the most precious luxury. You've changed your wolf fur again. The itching on the skin became part of the marching rhythm. The creaking of snow, the rustling of fabrics, and the whispering of the wind. As you move further into the heart of winter, everything blends together. On these mountains, the light soon vanished. One moment you squint your eyes at the dazzling snow, and the next you grope in the twilight, watching the horizon swallow the last ray of pale sunlight. The cold deepened instantly, as if the night itself were another enemy you had to fight against. Keep moving forward until the leader raises his hand. The procession came to a halt, the shield landed in the snow, and you heaved a sigh of relief, realizing it was time to make a fire. The camp unfolded slowly, and the soldiers moved like tired ants. Some people knelt on the ground and shoveled the snow onto it until patches of brown soil emerged from the white. Others fumbled with flint and steel, and sparks flew into the fragile air. You crouched closer, held your breath, and watched the tiny glimmer catch the dry moss and bark. The hopes of dozens of people are pinned on a spark smaller than a firefly, which is extremely fragile. When the flames finally rose, cheers gently rippled. The flames crackled out and turned into a small but provocative flame. You stretch out your hands, letting the heat sting your frozen skin. At first it hurt a lot, just like a needle piercing your finger, but soon the pain will subside and turn into a sweet warmth that makes you sigh. A mainstream fact is that the Vikings often carried iron fire hammers and fire wool boxes into battles, knowing that fire was as important as their swords. Without flames, there would be no hot water. Without cooked food, there would be no survival. However, in the shadow of history, quirks have surfaced. Some legends say that warriors grilled fish over fire, but others hint at even stranger food, with entire snowflakes scorched and even large chunks of sealfood hissing like greasy candles. Imagine the smell of cooking oil fumes sticking to your beard, the lingering scent after hunger. You wrinkled your nose, even though your stomach was still roaring. Of course, scholars are still debating just how good such expeditions are. Do the soldiers march with carefully dried rations, or pick up food from the frozen ground every night? Some researchers believe that the organized camps we imagine are often chaotic, impromptu, with too little fire, too little food, and the warmth is at best short-lived. When your flame flickers in the vast darkness, this argument here seems very heavy. The flames crackled, the sparks rose upwards, shining like little stars, and then went out. Beside the fire, the men took off their damp boots and held them tightly. Steam rose from the leather, as if the boots themselves were sighing. The pungent smell is a pot of survivals mixed with damp wool, sweat, and smoke. Several soldiers ridiculed the absurdity of drying socks on the spear shaft. The socks are hard enough to stand straight by oneself. For laughter can shorten the night. You string a dried fish together and roast it over the fire. The meat curls up, turns brown, drips a little fat in the fire, and emits hissing smoke. The taste is salty and hard, but compared with chewing frozen bark before, it feels like a feast. You chew slowly, savor it, pretending that you have returned to a warm hole, listening to music, rather than being in the snow with wolves howling in the distance. Fire not only generates heat, but also makes sounds. It crackled steadily, filling the silence with a relaxing rhythm. You clenched your eyes and listened for a while. The hissing sound of sap bursting out in the forest, the murmuring voices, but the occasional laughter minus all of this softened the cruel edge of the mountain night. However, the cold has never been far away. When you lean back, you will feel the cold air of the world approaching you. Leaving the circle of flames, darkness tightly oppressed and devoured the entire warmth. You know this tiny fire is more of a fragile truce with the wilderness than a comfort. It will keep you alive tonight, but only if you protect it. Feed it and keep it from being blown out by the wind that wants to kill it. You rubbed your hands again. The fur on the cuffs was slightly charred because you were too close. The smoke clung tightly to you and seeped into every garment of yours, so that when you left, you would also take the men of this camp with you. That smell's not merely a memory. It is a survival strategy tattooed on your skin. Around you, people start to settle down. Some lie beside you while others crowd together. The fire in the stove continued to burn, casting flickering shadows on the tired face. You watched the flames dance and realized that this was the first time you had stopped moving all day. Silence makes one feel strange and vulnerable, but that's enough. The night is cold and the mountains are cruel, but during these few hours, you have fire, you have warmth, and you have each other. As night fell, the fire gradually weakened. When morning came, only a wisp of smoke rose gently in the pale air. When you woke up, your limbs were stiff, your joints creaked like old wood, and there was a layer of frost on the edge of your cloak. The breath you exhale is very strong. This is the only landscape that makes one feel frozen. Thirst bites you before hunger. Water. In a world made of ice, where would it come from? You kneel down, pick up a handful of snow and put it in your mouth. It creaks between your teeth and is so cold, but it makes your gums hurt. It slowly melts and trickles down your throat, but it's not satisfactory. This is like chewing on the emptiness of pain. Do you still remember those warnings? Don't eat the snow on the ground directly for a long time, because it absorbs your body heat much faster than you lose it. This is a mainstream fact. Viking travelers often melted snow or ice in iron pots, placed them over fire, and, where possible, mixed them with herbs or even broth to turn the thin water into something warm enough to sustain their lives. But there was no pot ready here, nor was a fire lit, yet you had no patience. Anyway, you still need to chew, just to relieve your dry mouthed tongue. Around you, others do the same. When they scoop out and from the wrong place, they spit it out. Snow has a faint mineral taste, clean, but it also has a metallic flavor, as if you were licking this mountain. Then comes the even stranger part. The quirks of survival are not always meaningful. Some stories tell of soldiers storing snow in their leather bags and placing it near their bodies so that it would melt into drinking water. Imagine it. Walking along, a bag of cold smoothie was pressing down on your chest. The smoothie seeped into your coat, hoping to have a few drops of it in a while. Perhaps it is absurd, but when you are thirsty, absurdity turns into wisdom. Of course, historians are still debating whether the Vikings really transported snow in this way, or whether these details were exaggerated by later storytellers who were fascinated by the savagery of the North. Is this a common practice, or a desperate measure, only taken in the coldest winter? No one can give a definite answer, for the evidence is fleeting, just like the snow we discussed melting away. Your lips are stinging and chapped. You lick them with your tongue and taste the blood. The metallic smell mingled with the bone-minus chilling coldness of the snow. For a moment, you felt as if you were drinking iron. The pain in the teeth intensified, and every nerve was ignited by the cold impact. You shook your head, groaned gently, and spat out the last piece before it made you even more numb. This group of people began the ceremony of lighting the morning fire. Flint strikes steel, sparks dance, and the familiar hissing sound of melting snow in the pot fills the camp. Strangely, when the water turned into liquid again, the sound was as soothing as a tiny volume. You held the cup made of ox horns, waiting eagerly. Finally, the melted snow poured in, giving off a slight steam. Savoring the warmth that seeped into your palm, you sipped carefully, the heat burning your tongue, in contrast to the cold pain before. It's very thin and plain, but it feels very luxurious. Around you, men are whispering and joking. A person pretended to toast with his horn, claiming that the snow water was better than any water in Denmark. Laughter echoed in the camp, tired but genuine. Humor has become a seasoning, adding flavor to a drink that is only about survival. The sensory details leave you at a loss. Steam swirled on your face, softening the sting of the cold wind. The smell was very faint, almost more than the damp air. However, compared with the strong smell of frost and leather, it gives a refreshing feeling. Warmth slowly spreads along your chest and gathers in your stomach, just like the glow of a candle. For the first time in several hours, you have felt the heart of Thor. It is easy for people to forget that in this situation. Water seems simple but is actually a lifeline, but is more difficult to obtain than food. For several days, but without water, your body will soon become weak. So every morning begins with this ritual. Sip survival. You wiped your lips with the back of the glove and felt the frosty shell cracking on the fur. You watched the steam rising from the pot. Yet you realized that this march was largely not by strength of steel, but by patience waiting for the snow to turn into water, waiting for the fire to turn into heat, waiting for the night to turn into day. Every drop is worth it, and every drop can take you one step forward in the mountains. The parade has started again, and this time the weight is unbearable. Yesterday you thought you had understood the weight, but now you have discovered a new definition, one that stems from iron and fatigue. The axe tied to your back pulls your shoulder like an anchor. The sword on your waist strikes your thigh, and every step you take leaves a scar. Then there are shields. The shield constantly reminds us that war is not merely fighting, but dragging a piece of wooden iron through miles of merciless snow. Here is a mainstream fact. The shields of the Vikings were usually about 80 to 90 centimeters in diameter, made of fir or pine boards, with leather edges and reinforced with an iron protruding platform in the center. Compared with some medieval designs, it is lighter in weight, but it remains a solid burden when carried day after day. Imagine that when you are climbing a mountain, your body is pressing against a wooden door. This is how I feel. Duck the belt into your shoulder. You keep moving them, but the weight always comes back, like a ruthless hand biting down. Your arm will hurt before you raise your shield to defend yourself. You try to adjust the sword band at your waist, but the leather hardened in the cold. The belt buckle moaned as if it hated this tension too. Then comes the absurdity. Some legends mention that when the snowdrifts become too steep, warriors will use their shields as sleds. It is said that they sat on the chairs and screamed as they slid down. The iron boss sparks on the hidden rock. This sounds childish, just like a raider in a winter sports meeting. But you still imagined it. A team of fully armed soldiers riding round wooden discs roared down the slope. Thinking of this, you almost burst out laughing, even though you wondered if their shields would eventually split in two. Not every detail of these burdens is consistent. Scholars are still questioning whether ordinary soldiers really carried all their weapons and arms during long journeys, or whether some of their equipment was pulled by pack horses or REINS at the back. Do people like you always hunch over under heavy pressure, or do they sometimes walk more lightly to conserve some strength for battles? The historical record remains hazy, and this is a debate with no solution in sight. However, your body tells you that at this moment, everything is within you. The bandage was bitten deeper, and the muscles in the shoulders throbbed with every jolt. You will feel pain spreading from your spine to your lower back and buttocks. This was a slowly spreading fire, burning even hotter than frost. Every step turned into negotiation. Can you keep taking another bite? Can you pretend that the pain doesn't exist? Heavy snow made the situation even more complicated. Every time your boots sink, you must pull the weight up. It's like constantly climbing stairs with iron tied to one's limbs. The edge of the shield is tightly against your knee. Each time the axe moved, It made half a loud noise. But your voice was blown away by the wind. Around you, others are also suffering. You see a man moving his shield to the front and holding it, as if it were a bucket, his arms trembling. Another person dragged the edge of his shield through the snow, leaving a long groove behind him. You heard the scraping sound and thought of the sled, although there was no mischievous expression on his face. Your fingers are throbbing at the spot where you are grasping the band. You no longer feel the tip of a needle, only the dull pain brought by pressure remains. The leather hardened due to frost, and its edges bit into your palm like knives. You know if you stop moving, the blood will slow down and soon you will lose all consciousness. You bend your fingers, rub them against the fur lining of the cloak, and then clench them again. This cycle repeats endlessly. Relax, rub, grasp. The sensory world is cruel. The snow creaked under the extra weight, screeching and mocking. Your breath made a shrill sound in the scarf that covered your mouth. The sound was amplified, as if you were listening to your lungs struggling. The iron parts of your gear make a clicking sound every time they vibrate. Even the smell is unbearable. Sweat is hidden in the fur, the sharp taste of iron. There is also the smell of oil used to prevent weapons from rusting. The oil that once reassured people, now makes them feel bored. Your nose is very congested, as if you were inhaling tar. Despite the pain, small adaptive behaviors emerged. A warrior tied the hilt of his sword to his belt with a rope so that it wouldn't hit his thigh. Another person stuffed a folded piece of wool under the shield belt to relieve the pressure on his shoulders. These minor adjustments made marching tolerable. Take notes, copy as much as possible, and be grateful for any comforting hints. Then the mountains will further mock you. The path suddenly became steeper, and all of a sudden, every load doubled. Your shield slides behind you, and with every step you take, it could knock you backward. You lean forward, almost crawling, and your arms swing like pistons. The snow under your boots has collapsed, so every harvest feels like it's been stolen. Despite the cold, sweat still broke out and soaked the wool under your cloak. You almost immediately felt it freeze, and your skin was pricked by the cold needle. Someone is cursing you behind your back in a language you have no idea about at all. But this kind of emotion is widespread. A grunt, and yes, another person fell down. The shields crackled and the swords rubbed back and forth. The procession came to a halt. For a moment, you were worried that the weight of 30 people would collapse into a heap. But they would recover, dragging their bodies upright, marching and staggering forward. The absurdity is that even in such pain, pride is very important. A person may stagger, but he will not willingly lay down his shield. Leaving it behind is a disgrace and a betrayal of the military. It is better to break your back than to admit your weakness. You hold on tighter and tell yourself the same thing. You won't be the one to let go. Your thoughts are wandering just as often happens when fatigue dulls your senses. You imagine the feeling of going home, with bare arms free of burden. The sounds of children playing by the stove. There is no simple luxury of clanging iron beside you when walking. Even if your weight is holding you back, your memory is cheering you on. Please pause for a moment. You just need enough time to hang the protective cover higher. Remove the white frost sword band from your eyelashes. The mountains are faintly visible and indifferent, making you dare not continue. You know that if you give up everything here, if you give up your burden, the parade will not continue without you. You will be left in the snow and forgotten. So you move forward again, bending over in pain stubborn. Every creaking sound of the snow is a victory. Every collision of iron proves that you are still moving. Although the weight feels endless, you have understood something profound. Survival is not for comfort. It's about carrying what you must carry. No matter how heavy or cruel it is, burden is the price of life. No, you are still paying. The parade is still ongoing. Today's test is not hunger or thirst. This is entirely a matter of food logistics. You glanced at the sack on your shoulder, heavier than any luxury item, yet lighter than life itself. Inside is dry and stubborn food. When there is only snow and rocks on the land, they keep you going. Contemporary records confirm that Viking travelers relied heavily on pickled foods during their expeditions. Dried fish is a staple food, flattened and as tough as leather. There are also barley cakes. Baked very hard and can be kept for several months. Now tear off one piece and chew it slowly. Your chin is aching from the effort. It tastes like salt and smoke, and this flavor will remain on your tongue for a long time after you swallow it. But the records hide even stranger stories. There is a strange detail in some materials. The soldiers sometimes carried yogurt or curd sealed in the skin. This sounds almost disgusting. However, lactic acid simultaneously provides hydration and energy. Imagine you are sipping a bag of half-rotten milk in a snowstorm. Suddenly, the dried barley cake doesn't seem so bad anymore. You sneer at this idea and shake your head at all that people can endure for survival. Researchers still have differences over just how good these food supplies are. Does each team carry carefully allocated backpacks? Or is it mostly impromptu creation? Just grabbing some bread, cheese or bacon before setting off? Some people believe that only wealthier leaders can obtain the best rations, while poorer soldiers can only survive on leftovers and luck. The truth is likely to be drifting in the smoke of the forgotten bonfire. The sound of preparing food was faint but clear. You can hear the sound of the knife scraping across the frozen bread, the sound of the dried meat being torn apart, and the gentle swaying of the liquid poured out of the crust bottle. Every voice makes us feel close and reminds us that even the most seasoned warriors must eat like everyone else. The smell here is also stronger. The dried fish is so spicy that it can make one's nose wrinkle. The bread has turned sour due to aging. A faint smell of a leather bag soaked in milk. This is not a feast. This is a life covered with breadcrumbs. Its texture will drive your senses crazy. The bread cracked under your teeth, sharp enough to cut your gums. The dried meat pulls your chin like a rope until it becomes soft. When you think of the warm stews, thick onions and herbs from your hometown, you almost laugh at this absurdity. A piece of barley cake is like a grand feast. The weight of the food is another irony. It keeps you alive, but every step you take holds you back. You move the sack, trying to balance it with your shield, although it doesn't help at all. Every bite you take is a double-edged sword. You relieved the burden, yes, but you also reminded yourself of how limited the supply island was. Every piece chewed means one less piece tomorrow. A person hummed loudly about dried herring and closed his eyes warily uncontentedly. Another method is to soak the hard bread in melted snow water to soften it, so that it breaks into a paste before swallowing. The third person carefully grabbed a small piece of cheese and only took a small bite. Hunger has its own ritual, and everyone has their own ritual. All of this even has a faint rhythm, followed by the crunching of bread and then the gurgling of thin water. Marching and eating are combined. Both are necessary and both are exhausting. So you keep chewing step by step, bite by bite, knowing that these meager foods are the difference between you and breakdown. This is not glorious, but this is not romantic, but it's about survival. Among these mountains, this is already quite glorious. The path of progress becomes blurred, and soon you realize that this land itself is your enemy. The mountains are vast, the slopes are steep, and the snow covers everything, even obscuring the paths beneath our feet. You try to find familiar shapes, but the scenery keeps recurring, ridges following ridges, drifting and drifting, until you don't know if you are moving forward. One thing that historians generally accept is that Viking warriors were good at using the natural world for navigation. At night, the stars guide them as if they were on the sea. During the day, they rely on the arc of the sun, the shapes of mountains, and even the patterns of moss on rocks to guide their way. You tilted your head and gazed at the green patch tightly against the stone. You weren't going in circles and felt very relieved in your heart. Then came the strange, almost folklore icy details. Some records mention that ravens were carried as living compasses. The soldiers released these birds to see where they flew, believing that they could find land or the nearest valley. Now imagine a crow ping towards the grey sky, its black wings piercing through the storm, while dozens of people are waiting below, their fates determined by its flight choices. This kind of dependence has both smart and absurd aspects. Scholars have been debating whether these stories about crows traveling on land are true or symbolic. Were these birds really tied up and released like scouts? Or is the chrome oar like a poetic symbol, representing intuition and Doton's favor? There is too little evidence to solve this problem, leaving you squinting and puzzled in the wind. Snow plays tricks on your senses. One moment it blinds your eyes with dazzling light, and the next it casts a shadow over the world. You often trip, not only because you are tired, but also because you lose your way. It's as if the ground beneath your feet is constantly moving. The sound of the wind is unchanging, yet deceptive. It roars in your ear and then suddenly falls silent, making you dizzy. Every breath feels like biting iron. Your tongue is swollen in your mouth, and your lips are numb and cracked. But it was already stiff from the frost, so you breathe through tiny gaps with each puff. Because distance is meaningless here, marching feels endless. Without marking, you won't have the feeling of progress. A ridge faintly emerged ahead. You climb up and make sure the valley is right in front of you. But at the top of the mountain, you can only see another ridge, another endless slope. The men moaned softly. The curse drifted like smoke, but no one stopped. To stop is death. You should pay attention to the small details. Bent branches, half miners buried in the snow. Ranched as not trace of the slope. The twinkling of stars when the clouds briefly disperse. These fragments become your map. A jigsaw puzzle that guides you through a blank canvas. And you follow his gaze. The sky had just cleared up, revealing the faint line of the North Star. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief, subtle and genuine. You heard the whisper of gratitude. Some people whispered to the gods, while others murmured to themselves in weary voices. For a moment, you felt more stable, as if the stars themselves were bending down to guide your steps. But the cold soon reminds you that the stars cannot warm your bones. You struggled forward again, your shield heavy and your breathing rapid, realizing that the true skill of Viking navigation was not merely to look at the sky or the land. It endures endless uncertainties, moves forward when the world seems to vanish, and believes that even in a white and silent place, there is always a way out. As the slope narrowed, the journey became quieter, and then a sound broke the silence. A low and perilous rumbling sound resounded through the valley. You freeze. Everyone was stunned. The sound grew louder and louder, as if the mountain had taken a deep breath too. Avalanches are enemies you can't fight against with steel. Know that. The records clearly show that winter marches are always shrouded in the threat of avalanches. The combination of heavy snow, moving wind and human footsteps may cause the ice wall to collapse without warning. You can imagine a huge white wave, instantly burying both people and equipment. When a mountain decides to move, there is no second chance. Then there is a strange note from an oral tradition. Some people say that in some valleys, soldiers would strike their shields or shout loudly. They believed that the sound would wake up the snow and bring danger faster before they sank deeper. This logic is questionable. You imagine the bearded man shouting at the cliff as if challenging them to fight. But this kind of rebellious behavior seems quite appropriate. It is better to provoke fate than to be caught off guard. Experts still hold different opinions on the Vikings' caution about avalanches. Do they understand the scientific principle of snow accumulation, or do they believe in luck and bottom forge ahead bravely? Some people think they have learned lessons from experience and avoided certain slopes, while others believe that risks are inevitable. You find yourself not knowing which category you belong to, whether you are cautious or rash. The rumbling sound gradually faded away. Although your heart is still beating fiercely, there is a hint of comfort flowing in your veins. The ensuing silence was louder than the clamor, as if the entire mountain held its breath along with you. You realized that you had held the shield too tightly. Your knuckles stiffened, your face pale. The sensory world becomes acute in fear. The snow under your boots groaned even louder. Every step is a problem. Could this be the key to breaking the balance? Your ears were to hear more rumbling sounds. Your gaze falls upon the ridge above, seeking the slightest drift. Even the wind has taken on new meanings. It spoke softly, hissed and quacked, as if this might be a signal that the snow was moving upwards. You taste violet at the back of your throat. A sharp wave of fear mingled with a metallic chill. Your mouth is dry, although there is a lot of snow around you. You resisted the urge to scoop it up. On the contrary, when you hear the sound of a crack or a sigh in the distance, you press your lips tightly together and hold your breath. The men walked more slowly, unhurried and quiet. The shield no longer makes a clicking sound. The sword was held very close to minimize noise. It feels like a funeral procession, carrying respect through the mountains. One person slipped and the whole team froze again. Listen. All that followed was silence. He stood up, his face pale, and continued speaking. And stop yourself. The ridge was very steep, covered with thick snow, just like the edge of a roof after a storm. They looked harmless and almost beautiful, glowing slightly in the dim light. But you know beauty can kill. Do you still remember the story of the entire band being swallowed up in an instant? The flag was buried into the names vanished. When the path bends into a gentle slope, you finally allow yourself to exhale. Danger has never vanished, it just seems more distant. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The man loosened the grip, with his shoulders slightly drooping. Some people even murmured jokes. The threat is over, and black humor is back. You know, this is the pace of survival in the mountains. Fear and relaxation, tension and release. An avalanche may never come, but the threat influences every step you take. Not only do you have to fight against the cold and hunger, but also the weight of the invisible snow hanging above your head, waiting for the right moment to fall. The march came to a halt by an icy river. A gleaming thin plate spans the valley, like a trap disguised as glass. You gaze at it, not sure whether it will take you away or swallow you whole. The water flow below is invisible but merciless, humming in your imagination. One wrong step and you might fall into the black water colder than death. Archaeological discoveries strongly indicate that Viking warriors often encountered such transit points during winter campaigns. Ice is not only an obstacle but also a shortcut across the valley, a frozen bridge connecting various places. It takes several days to walk through it in summer. Ignoring these rivers is a waste of time and energy. However, it is believed that they are risking their lives. Even more strangely, some reports claim that at these moments, shields are being reused as sleds. The soldiers laid them flat, placed their equipment on top, and then pushed them over, carefully sliding over the surface. It's almost comical to imagine a seasoned attacker crawling on a makeshift toy like a child. But you understand the logic behind it. The smaller the weight of a piece of ice, the easier it is to diversify the risk. The academic community has yet to reach a consensus on exactly how successful these methods are. Some people believe that the practice of using shields as sleds is a rare improvisation, more of a legend than a routine. Others, however, consider this common sense and a practical way to quickly transport the burden. The argument is still ongoing. You can only decide whether to give it a try based on your own heartbeat. You kneel down and press your gloves onto the ice. It moaned faintly, its low moan shaking your arm. The surface is hard and smooth, nearly beautiful in dim light. But the US has lied before. Imagine yourself walking forward, hearing a crackling sound, and feeling a sudden drop. This thought makes your stomach churn. Around you, men are all testing the surface. A person strikes with his spear shaft, listening to see if it's empty. Another one was squatting, pressing one ear to the ice, as if listening to a secret. The sounds they hear determine their fate. Is this river passable today? The air here is fresher, filled with the damp smell of stones and pine wood transported from downstream. The bone-minus chilling wind swept through the open valley, cutting through furs and wool. They pulled the kiter, although it was more like a gesture of hope than one of warmth. And Nan stepped forward sideways. His boots are knotted. The ice is trembling but as firm as a rock. Slowly and carefully, the others followed one by one. You put your feet on the water surface and feel the world beneath your feet moving. The size of the ice cubes, a sound that makes your chest feel tight. You dragged your feet forward, short in length, holding up the shield high as if it could save you from drowning. Every feeling has intensified. The creaking of the snow vanished, replaced by a terrifying silence. The river is brimming with vitality, humming beneath your feet, and temptation whispers. The smell of cold water rises round mineral. Your breathing became very thick, blurring your vision. You tasted the flavor of fear at the back of your tongue, bitter and sour. Halfway through, a crack split the air. Everyone stopped. That voice echoed like thunder, sharp and ruthless. Faster. I'd only see the hairline disappearing into the shadow. Someone prayed in a low voice, their voice trembling. The subsequent silence was unbearable. Then the team leader gave the signal, keep going. This group of people moved forward slowly. Ice was groaning, but still there. And you finally set foot on the solid ground. Your veins were filled with relief. You exhaled trembling, realizing that you had held your breath for too long. Behind you, the frozen river has calmed down again, as if mocking your fear. However, you know better. Ice has never been a friend, it is a temporary ally until it decides to no longer be loyal. With freezing your fingers and toes, now it's aiming at your breath. Every inhalation feels like swallowing a knife. The bone minus chilling air is enough to sting your chest. Your nose is too numb. You're not sure if it's still there. Every time you exhale, your beard will become heavier and stiff because of the frost. This mountain will not only make you feel cold, but also make you vulnerable and strange. It is well known that Viking warriors gradually got used to these extreme situations. Both written materials and archaeological evidence describe how men marched in winter. Their beards and eyebrows were frozen white and their hair stiff, as if it were carved out of wood. They do not regard it as a disaster but as proof of patience. The frozen beard turned into a badge, silently declaring that you once walked against the wind without ever wavering. However, there is a strange saying in folk tales. Some legends mention that before setting out, soldiers deliberately smeared fat or grease on their faces, believing that this could prevent the frost from getting too deep. In your mind there is a row of soldiers, their cheeks shining as if oiled for battle, struggling to climb up the snow minus kept reach. It's a bit funny, but the idea makes sense. Fat absorbs heat and blocks the stinging sensation. But experts still disagree whether this is a common practice or just a trick used in isolated communities. Is this a clever adaptation lost in the legendary story, or an embellishment added by the storyteller for the sake of color? This problem remains unresolved, swirling like the wind and refusing to be resolved. The sensory world here is ruthless. Every gust of fierce wind howled through the rocks, shrill and piercing. The sound is ruthless, just like 1,000 little flutes screaming simultaneously. Even though your ears are wrapped in wool, they still hurt. When you touch them, they will feel dull and show no response. Even your breath gives you away in the scarf on your face. The moisture freezes, making the fabric hard until it scratches your lips like sandpaper. There was a pungent metallic smell in the air, just like biting iron. You keep tasting it, as if the mountain had already seeped into your mouth. The cold dried everything up. Your lips are cracked. Your tongue will briefly stick to your teeth. Even your eyes were pricked by the cold wind, and your eyes rapidly, and your eyelashes flickered slightly with the cold light. Every movement was very awkward. You look around and find that your comrades have undergone the same changes. Their faces were pale, and their beards were covered with icicles, which shone slightly with faint sunlight. Some people ridiculed each other's appearances, pointing at the strangely shaped frost masks surrounding their mouths and noses. When a soldier sneezes, the spray will immediately solidify and form a tiny layer of ice skin on his scarf. Although you were in great pain, this absurdity still made you giggle. However, behind humor lies danger. You notice him desperately rubbing his cheeks, trying to restore his complexion. His skin looked pale, sallow, and almost blue. You know, frostbite spreads quietly, quietly when the laughter is at its loudest. The march is still going on because stopping means worse. Feel pain and numbness. First comes the sharp pain of blood wanting to flow, followed by the numbed silence of nerves ceasing to function. You gently slapped your thigh with your fist, eager to feel something. The axe in your hand has become smooth due to the frost, as if the weapon itself wishes to freeze and free itself from you. Nevertheless, it still has a strange kind of beauty. You raised your head and saw the wind sweeping the clouds. The sky was so clear that it felt boundless. The weakened cold sun shone on every cold, bearded the edge of the shield, transforming the warp and into a group of glass statues. In an instant, you no longer imagined yourselves as men, but more as frozen heroes, forever engraved on the mountain peaks. With the next gust of wind blowing, the illusion vanished quickly, but you have always carried it with you. Perhaps this is the true meaning of living in the North. Not only should one endure the pain, but also learn to discover the fleeting beauty in it and move forward step by step with it. The rhythm of the boots and breathing became monotonous, so someone began to hum. At first there were whispers, almost drowned out by the wind. Then, one after another, they joined in until the hum turned into a tune, slow and steady, weaving like smoke in the cold air. Soon a few more lines of legendary tales were added, some half-minus baked verses about gods, giants and distant oceans. The chronicles of that era describe how Viking warriors relied on songs and chanting to keep up with the rhythm during their long journeys. The rhythm of music connects people together, transforming weary steps into a single heartbeat. You can feel it now. Your legs move to the rhythm. When the sound rises, your shoulders won't hurt so much. Marching in the mountains is no longer a punishment, but a harsh march. In some legendary stories, a strange practice is mentioned. It is said that soldiers would carve runes on short wooden sticks and carry them with them, just like musical amulets. These are not musical instruments, but the magic to preserve the memories of songs. A person might point at these carvings with his finger while singing, believing that the wood will remember his voice and give him strength next time. You see a comrade humming a song while making marks on a stick, with his eyes half-minus closed, as if communicating with the song itself. However, these pieces of evidence raise doubts about just how widespread this habit is. Does every warban have such a rune staff? Or is it only a few cursing poets and warriors who mix memories with music that have this habit? The divergence in sources has left modern scholars unsure whether to regard it as a fact or a fantasy. However, in the serenity between the verses, you almost believe that the wood itself is humming. The soundscape changes along with the variations of the song. Apart from the creaking of snow and the howling of the wind, there is also rhythm and harmony, a distinct human element. The deep baritone rumbled like a distant drumbeat, while the high notes swayed like a flute. When the air is filled with sounds, the smell is different. The weather seems to be getting warmer, although there is still frost in your breath. You find yourself singing softly. At first your words are incoherent, but then they flow smoothly along with the chorus. This poem is very simple. It is a reduplication of lines about Odin's wisdom and Thor's hammer. But you don't need complexity. The purpose is not for beauty. This is unity. Your voice is so cold it's piercing. However, it mixes with the others to form a larger thing. Humor also emerged. A warrior changed the name of the goddess to that of a farm animal and added a bored poem. This line of dialogue elicited laughter. In this desolate place, a burst of rough laughter was like a gift. When laughter filled the air, even the mountains seemed less terrifying. The physical pain didn't disappear, but the song wrapped around it like a bandage. The pain in your shoulder turned into background noise, softened by the rhythm. When you tap your finger in time, the numbness of your finger is not so important. Even the shield beside you will sync to the beat, changing from dislike to strike. The smell and sound are mixed together. The wool and leather around you have become heavy due to sweat, smoke and frost. But now, this smell is associated with memories. This will be the taste of singing, the taste of trekking in the snow, and the sound drifting in the wind. You took a deep breath, as if inhaling courage. When the peace finally came to an end, the silence was heavier than before. The wind has returned, and the snow is creaking, but the echoes of the sounds linger in your ears. It's as if the mountain itself carries this song, bouncing it back from one ridge to another. You wonder if these echoes will still exist for a long time after your death. A ghostly chorus lingered in the valley. You kept moving forward, your lips chapped and your chest ached, but your mood became relaxed. Music has achieved what meat and fire cannot. It makes the cold briefly serve as the backdrop rather than the entire world. You know another song will soon play, for the silence is too harsh to bear alone. As night fell, the problem of heating followed. Fire alone is far from enough. When the wind seeps in through every crack of the camp, it won't. The only solution is each other. You and your comrades minus and minus arms huddle together, pressing your shoulders and backs together, and arranging shields along the periphery, just like an extra wall. The result is a rough fortress made of meat and wood, in which the bodies heat and iron all play a role. A detail generally accepted by historians is that the Vikings not only used shields in battles, but also employed them as multi-purpose tools, tables and sleds, and in winter, they served as temporary barriers to keep warm. The edges of these shields are connected to form a circle, trapping the precious heat inside. You'll be able to sense the difference immediately. The air inside was still very cold, but without the direct bite of the wind, it was almost bearable. Even more strangely, the legendary story retains a peculiar image. The soldiers were lying down, and their shields actually covered their bodies like huge wooden blankets. This idea is almost absurd. Sleeping under something you use to stop the swing of an axe. But the weight is so close that it seals away the little warmth you can still generate. You moved your shield to the right place, half happy and half grateful. The academic debate over how effective this strategy is still ongoing. Some people believe that the arrangement of soldiers and shields is highly organized and trained like a battle formation. Others, however, think the situation is much more chaotic, a pile of desperate corpses and planks, with no order at all. The source of information makes you guess. But here, the pressure among comrades. You know that order is more important than survival. The sensory experience is intense. The smell of men huddled together is never wrong. The wool was covered with sweat, the leather was frosted, and a faint sour smell of yogurt leaked from someone's pocket. It should make you unhappy, but it comforts you instead. The scent of a person means life, and life means warmth. You can feel every tremble of the man beside you. Their capes brushed past your arm. Their scent lingers on your cheeks. And man was already snoring, his head drooping over another person's shoulder. Another person prayed to Thor in a low voice, his words veiled by layers of fur. Close your eyes and let the chorus of your breath surround you, steadying down minus to minus earth. The sound of the wind was blocked by the shield wall. Outside, there were howls and whips, but within the circle, it turned into a distant roar, like an animal pacing at the edge of a cage. You listened carefully and heaved a sigh of relief. Tonight, at least beasts couldn't get in. You moved slightly and felt the shield bending on your ribs. The wood has a faint smell of asphalt. It is a kind of resin that was once used to seal wooden boards. This smell blends with the smoke from a soon minus cool, minus extinguished fire and the musk of fur, creating a scent that adheres to your skin. Your nose wrinkled, but you still took a deep breath. The icy cold air climbed up from the snow beneath your feet, still stinging your toes. You twist them in your boots, hoping to keep the blood flowing. Their fingers are tucked under your armpits wrapped in fur, but they flutter as if recalling every hour of exposure. You leaned closer to the man beside you, and both of you sighed at the little increase of warmth. In this crowded embrace, the sense of individuality vanishes. You are not just one of many soldiers. You are part of a breathing organism united for survival. When one person shifts, all others shift. When one person trembles, everyone can feel it. If one fails, the secret society will weaken. You realize that the warmth here is not just about temperature. This is trust. So close together, you entrust your life to the people around you, and they also entrust it to you. Ice shield can protect your body, but loyalty can safeguard your soul. The fire outside flared up for the last time, and darkness swallowed up the camp. You drift into a dreamland, enveloped by the thick sense of humans. Wooden frost, hypnotized by a strange comfort, for you are but one of the countless beings. The night had just ended when you heard it. That faint voice made everyone stand up. Wolf, their howls rolled across the snow like the voices of the dead, long and sorrowful, rising and falling from time to time, and monotonous enough to send shivers down one's spine. You instinctively grab the shield, your heart pounding. The cold minus-hearted mare is in the flesh, but the wolf brings another kind of fear. It feels like the wilderness itself is alive, chasing after you. Contemporary records confirm that during the Viking Age, wolves frequently appeared in the forests and mountains of Scandinavia. They follow the traveler, sometimes walking several miles, waiting to create an opportunity when they are tired or weak. It was precisely this feeling of a marching army carrying flesh, blood and fire that drew the hungry wolves even closer. You glanced at the remaining dried fish and bones in the camp and suddenly wondered if they were a temptation. Then you will recall a strange note in folk tales. It is said that some warriors imitate the cries of wolves to scare them, or in darker stories, invite their souls as allies. You can imagine that scene: dozens of frostbitten people standing in the snow, looking up and howling at the night as if competing with a wild beast. It might be absurd, but it's also quite appropriate. In a world where gods are shape-shifters and warriors wear wolfskins to fight, the boundary between humans and beasts can easily become blurred. However, the academic debate over exactly how often wolves pose a real threat continues. Some researchers believe that wolf packs will try their best to avoid humans, linger at the edge of the camp, but rarely attack humans. Others believe that it is the despair of winter that drives them closer, and hunger makes them more courageous, ready to test the courage of the armed personnel. There is no definite answer, only the tense atmosphere in the air whenever the yellow eyes flicker in the darkness. The sensory world tonight is more acute than ever before. The wind had died down, leaving such a complete silence that every branch had broken. Every creaking of the snow seems to be amplified. The howling of wolves echoed among the ridges. Unable to locate. Are they in the north, the east, or behind you? This uncertainty is no more intense than hunger. You taste fear in your mouth, dry and bitter. Your tongue feels very heavy. Your lips are cracked from the cold. Every breath you take shrouds the air in a layer of mist, making you feel exposed and seen by others, just like a signal flare from a natural enemy. You gently moved your shield, and the belt creaked, the sound deafening in the silence. The smell of the camp is beyond doubt. The smoke from the embers, the sweat from the sheep's hair, and the faint metallic smell from the man's blistered hands. For wolf, this is irresistible. You wrinkled your nose, half in disgust and half in worry, pulling your cloak tighter as if this could mask the smell. Your comrades are restless. A person sharpened the tip of his spear in an exaggerated and slow manner, and the scraping sound was steady and ominous. Another person tied several extra belts around his boots, muttering that he wouldn't let the wolf knock him down easily. You see the shining eyes in the firelight. This time it's not a wolf but a human, broad and vigilant, reflecting the same fear as you. Then came silence. The howling suddenly stopped as if it had suddenly begun. This disappearance is even worse as it indicates that wolves are no longer far away. You swept through the darkness beyond the shield wall, squinting your eyes at the snowfield. Shadow movement. It might also be your imagination that got them moving. The edges of your vision are filled with illusions. The tail swung back and forth, its shape extremely fast. You held the axe tighter, and even though it was very cold, sweat still stung beneath. When the first uproar came, everyone froze. It sounds very close, even closer than you might have feared. Raise the spear, raise the shield. You hold your breath and try hard to listen to the sound of your claws stepping on the snow. There is nothing but another roar, and then another circling. They are testing you. Your thoughts once again wander back to those ancient tales, those about soldiers wearing wolfskins to fight. Some miners called Crazy Car Tribe claims to fight against the souls of wild beasts. You wonder if the animals have seen this in you now. Intimate relationship or challenge? This kind of thinking is disturbing, but it keeps you from breaking down. Time passed painfully. Minutes seemed like hours, and every heartbeat echoes in my ears. Finally, there was a loud bang. Someone threw a log into the fire. A spark leapt up, casting a sudden light in the darkness. For a moment, you saw them. Dozens of eyes twinkling with golden light at night. They vanished almost in an instant, but the scene was deeply imprinted in your mind. Fire has become your lifeline. You curl up in a warm place, even though your back feels exposed. The crackling wood masked some of the wolf sounds, which was both comfortable and terrifying. You no longer know whether they have retreated or quietly approached. However, fire implies resistance. Cold mountains and wolves both respect fire, or perhaps you wish so. Finally, this howl flew even further away, gradually vanishing into the night like a sound. A sense of relief swept through the entire camp. Not joy but exhaustion. People put down their shields, but no one laid down their weapons. You realize that you're white from holding the axe, and your arms are trembling from remaining tense for a long time. Night has fallen again. Stretch your stiff fingers, bend your shoulders, and bring your breathing back to rhythm. However, this lesson still lingers in these mountains. The danger is not merely snow or hunger. It has teeth, eyes, and its own hunger. When you close your eyes, the image of the yellow eyes in the darkness follows you into an uneasy dream. When you wake up, you know the wolves are still there, quietly at the edge of your march, waiting for your weakness to reappear. Morning's not kind. The camp gradually moved. People were stiff, their eyes sunken, still disturbed by the echoes of the wolves. You stood up, brushed the frost off your cloak, and looked ahead at the path. But there was no trace, only a white wall of anger rolling towards you. A snowstorm's coming. Archaeological evidence indicates that Viking expeditions often encountered sudden storms in mountainous areas. The snow was thick enough to cover the tents, erase the paths, and keep the entire army trapped there for several days. When the first wind blows, biting your face and roaring, you feel the truth. The snow is swirling around you, not gently floating but being flung back and forth by invisible fists. There is a strange detail in some legendary stories. Sometimes the soldiers would tie ropes around their waists to connect them together, so that no one would disappear into the white. You see it now. The rope is being pulled between people. A living chain is being pulled step by step. At first glance, this is almost comical, as if the children were eyed in a line, but the wisdom within is undeniable. In a storm that blinds and deafens people, a rope might be the only thing that reminds you you are not alone. Some experts questioned whether these practices were consistent or exaggerated in the subsequent narrative. Has every band really united? Or is this a desperate improvisation, only used in the coldest winter? The record has become blurred, leaving behind questions as thick as snow. It is certain that once the storm devours you, even the most powerful warrior will stumble and vanish without a trace. It felt like the attack occurred immediately. The wind howls in your ears, louder than any horn. The ice chips it carries sting your cheeks like cracking a whip. You squinted your eyes, but the snow forced you to close them. The eyelashes scab over until the line of sight turns into a shadow. Breathing is even worse. The air is blocked by snowflakes. Every inhalation is raw. Every exhalation is stolen before it warms your lips. You tasted the coldness and bitterness of the storm. Snowflakes melt into water droplets on your tongue, leaving only a faint metallic taste. Your mouth feels very dry. Even if snow seeps out of your scarf and soaks the fabric, it will harden immediately due to the frost. When you cough, the sound is blown away by the wind before it leaves your chest. All the senses except the sense of touch are blurred. The rope pulls at your waist, pulling you forward and reminding you to move. You hold it with one hand and the axe with the other. Although fighting here feels absurd, the storm itself is an enemy, not one you can strike. The snow around your boots is piling up very quickly, and you sink deeply with every step you take. You pull your legs hard. Fall down. Rise again. This kind of effort will exhaust your energy. The muscles are screaming as if you had been marching for several days within an hour. Your comrade's voice is a faint ghost, swallowed up immediately. Another cry behind you vanished in the roar. You can't see their faces, only their blurry figures swaying and staggering, stubbornly tied together by ropes. Fear strikes you. What should I do if the rope breaks? What if you go too far and find yourself lost in the white ocean, never to see you again? The smell of the storm is primitive and hollow. There was no smoke, no sweat, only the stench of barren snow dominated everything. You long for the musk of firewood or the scent of dried fish. Any human being. On the contrary, what you inhale is nothingness, which reminds you that the world here is being deprived of comfort. You often look down, searching for traces, but the storm erases them in just a few seconds. The road behind you seems as if it had never existed. This is disturbing, as if time itself is being rewritten. Your journey has been erased, even if you set foot on it. Now you understand why the legend says that mountains do not devour humans with their sharp fangs, but with silence and snow. Front of you and knelt down. You staggered forward, grabbed his arm and pulled him with a rope. His eyes were wide open and his face was pale, but he stood up again and murmured, "Thank you." The bond between people is the only anchor in this unpredictable void. Several hours passed, perhaps just a few minutes. Time loses its meaning in storm. You focus on the rhythm step by step. You hummed softly, the same tune as before, though the wind swallowed it up at once. But it can help you calm down and fight against chaos like a heartbeat. Finally, the storm weakened, the wind slowed down, the snow thinned, and the world reappeared piece by piece. The mountains emerged once again. The valley stretches on and on, pile and vast. The rope between you and others will loosen. Liberation is almost dazzling. You pulled down your scarf and took deep breaths of the air. The smell wasn't like a knife, but more like life. The camp was subdued that night. The men collapsed beside the fire, exhausted and unable to smile. The shield was tilted crookedly in the snow. The gear accidentally fell off. You sit near the flame, your hands covering it, feeling your skin crackling as the warmth returns. The smell of smoke is intoxicating, reminding you that you are still alive. You know the storm will come again. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. They are like hunger and wolves, part of this journey. But you also know that you have endured pain, and knowledge is a weapon sharper than any axe. For in these mountains the criterion for survival is not how many battles one has fought, but how many mornings one has spent. Tonight you sat by the stove, your cloak steaming and your body aching faintly. You whispered to yourself, "It's another day." You stole it back from the snow. When the storm finally enters your memory, you think perhaps the mountains have been kind. But probation is short-lived. Soon, a deeper and more sinister enemy emerged. It's not the sudden roar of an avalanche, nor the scream of a wolf, but the coldness that gradually tightens within your body. Parades are no longer like walking. It feels like dragging a bone that is no longer willing to obey. The records at that time confirmed that long -10 exposure to the freezing environment would make the soldier's body stiff, their movements slow and their joints almost locked. Some works by monks from the north describe those marches that look like ice sculptures, their movements sudden and painful. You feel the truth now. Every time you bend your knees, it feels as if rust has seeped into your bone marrow. A less traditional view holds that men rub snow on their limbs to restore blood circulation. Using cold to fight against cold may sound counterintuitive, but the impact of ice on the skin might get the blood moving. You imagine a warrior slapping a handful of snow on his thigh and cursing with trembling teeth. You can almost feel the sting yourself. Strange methods, yet in the midst of despair, even pain has become a tool. These pieces of evidence leave people with room to doubt just how effective these remedies are. Some scholars believe that they may do more harm than good, accelerating rather than preventing frostbite. Others, however, believe that these crude methods, when combined with pure movement, allow sufficient heat to flow and enable people to stand up. No matter what the truth is, without continuous efforts, The cold will take away you bit by bit. The feeling of stiffness is overwhelming. Your fingers can hardly hold your axe and your joints are all frozen stiff. You bend them again and again, but their response is very slow, just like puppets being pulled by a thin string. With every step you take, your knees will groan, and intense pain will spread upwards, as if there were ice blocks inside your body. Your shoulders hurt because you were carrying a shield and a backpack. But even worse, when the pain subsided, a faint numbness was felt, a numbness that implies danger. Now every breath you take makes a creaking sound in your chest. The cold air is burning, and your own lungs are making a shrill sound. Sound echoes in your ears. Its scent is metallic, reminding you that even within your body, the cold is cutting around you. Others are also struggling. A man stopped and frantically massaged his calves, slapping the muscles until they turned green. Another person shook his hands vigorously under their faces, and blood flowed back to his fingertips. The third person just staggered along, his eyes vacant, as if every step he took was borrowed from stubbornness rather than strength. Sound of the parade has changed. The song of yesterday has passed away. The current sound is a dull one of moaning, coughing and the dragging of boots. The shield no longer jingles proudly forth on the snow. Even the sound of the wind has changed. It no longer roars but more like a mocking whisper, reminding you of how insignificant you have become. The smell is very strong and unbearable. The wool was soaked with sweat and frozen into hard wooden boards, giving off a sour stench. The leather gives off a damp and rotten smell. A faint smell of blood wafted out from the cracked lips and knuckles. You sucked it all in. Every breath is filled with pain. Despite the pain, strange adaptations emerged. A man beside you reached his bare hand into the fur collar of the soldier in front of you and snorted an apology. No one protested. Another person stuffed dry moss into his boots to cushion the ice, placing it between the two layers until his feet looked swollen. Smart little moves made the parade full of vitality. Each one reminds us that survival depends not only on endurance but also on creation. Then came silence. That feeling was the final silence. A soldier fell behind. You turned around and saw him kneeling on the ground, his shield half-minus buried in the snow. His face was pale, his eyes were closed and his lips hardly moved. You know the truth. He didn't rest. He surrendered. The line has slowed down, but only temporarily. A hand reached out and shook him, but he didn't stand up. The parade continued to move forward. You have tasted the bitterness of guilt. Every step forward is like leaving a comrade minus and minus arms. However, the choice is tough. Die one or more. You swallow hard and your throat tightens. The taste of salt and iron rose, as if tears had frozen inside. This day never ends. Time becomes meaningless and can only be measured by pain and wheezing. You miss home, you miss the grassland in summer, where your joints can bend freely and your muscles can carry you lightly. Memory feels very strange, like a dream from another world. Here every move is a battle. Your enemy is not flesh and blood but the ice itself. That night after setting up camp you collapsed beside the fire, your limbs trembling. Warmth seeped in slowly and painfully. When the blood returned, the fingers ached so painfully that 1,000 needles pricked in simultaneously. You groan almost welcoming pain, for it means life. Around you others are doing the same thing. They make faces, curse softly, and even grit their teeth and laugh under the cruel pity of feeling a return. The flames flickered on the stiff faces, transforming the warriors into statues of bronze and frost. As you watch them rub their hands, stomp their feet and stretch their aching joints, you will realize something profound. The battle against the cold cannot be won overnight or in a single march. The war is endless. Every hour, every breath, every small victory, every warm finger, every rescued toe is more valuable than gold. You approach the flames and the smell of smoke wraps around you like a blanket. It will become stiff again tomorrow. You know the mountains are patient, they will constantly test you. But at least tonight, you can still move, still breathe, and still endure. When the next challenge comes, the stiffness of your bones doesn't disappear. Tonight, the men knelt in snow, their hands clasped tightly, their lips quivering and whispering in low voices. What they prayed for was not food or fire, nor the forgiveness of the gods. Here, faith has become another kind of armor, as important as fur or steel. One detail that archaeologists and historians unanimously agree on is that Viking warriors combined survival with rituals. Amulets of Thor's hammer were found in the camped graves. The small iron pendants that serve both protection and declaration. You can see them flickering slightly in the firelight, swaying around people's necks, praying to Thor for strength, to Odin for wisdom, and to Freya for peace. In this vast emptiness, the words were like sparks directed at the darkness. But there are even stranger customs circulating among the people. Some records show that before setting out, the soldiers carved runes into sticks or bones and carried them with them as if they were pocket-sized runes. In moments of despair, people stick these lovely things to their lips, kiss them, or throw them into the snow as offerings. Imagine a person digging out a wood carving and whispering to it, as if it could hear. The scene was almost absurd, but you didn't laugh. Not here. When cold claws are grasping your ribs, making you wonder if there is an invisible force listening to you. After all, there is a widespread divergence in the academic community over whether these rituals are truly widespread. Some people consider talismans and offerings as everyday practices, while others see them as embellishments by poets' desire to depict warriors as semi-mindless wizards. There is very little evidence, and only fragments can be left to explain. As you watch these people, you were lost in thought about the debate, your hands crossed and your breathing blurred. Perhaps truth is more important than the comfort brought by faith. The sensory world around you becomes sharp in the ritual. The fire made an unusual crackling sound. Every Mars leapt into the sky like a prayer. The smell of rosin and flame blends with the musk of damp wool, creating a rich fragrance that adheres tightly to your nose. You hear a murmuring name. Odin, Thor, Freya, Nord speak like old friends. The voice is steady and rhythmic, almost like last night's hymn, but deeper, slower, and with a sense of need. And before you could think, the words came out. You softly prayed to Odin for patience, asking your legs to keep moving when you wanted to stop. You tasted the saltness at the corner of your mouth, the faint scent of tears or sweat. You're not sure which one it is. Under the glow of the firelight, every face seemed to be carved out. The shadow highlighted the depression beneath the eyes, and the brows were furrowed devoutly. Anan raised his axe high, the blade shining in the firelight. He swore in a low voice that he would never let go unless Thor snatched it from his hand himself. Another one threw me into the flames, precious water droplets sacrificed with a hissing sound, and steam rose like the fingers of a ghost. You inhaled the sweetness of burning alcohol, a scent carrying the memory of a summer feast, temporarily dispelling the smell of cold air. Not all ceremonies are solemn. There are also some quirks. A soldier tied a red cloth around his wrist, claiming it could prevent frostbite. Another one grabbed some symbols on the snow and spat at them, claiming that it was an insult to the deity that brought the snowstorm. These performances seemed half funny and half serious, but no one laughed at them. Even absurd precepts can seem very important. Although scholars have been arguing endlessly about the accuracy of such practices, in this circle of men and fire, the debate seems insignificant. What matters is not whether God truly answers the question, but whether faith can support you to move forward when your body and will waver. The sound of prayer finally vanished, replaced by a tiresome silence. Suddenly, fire burst out. A piece of wood collapsed inward, and sparks swirled like little stars. The men leaned against their shields, their capes tightened and their eyes closed. The ceremony was over, but its echoes still lingered. A thread that binds you together to spend the night. You lean back and gaze at the sky. The separation of the clouds was just enough to reveal the stars, sharp and cold, yet very stable. For a moment, you believe they are listening. Somewhere beyond the frost, one of Odin's eyes is watching, weighing, and even approving. Yearning warms you more than flames. It is the quiet embers in your chest. The mountain winds swept across the camp, strong and weak. You know it will test you again tomorrow. But tonight, faith stands between you and despair, and that's enough. You fall into an uneasy sleep, with soft prayers still lingering in your mouth. Dawn came, but it did not bring relief. The cold has changed the direction of its attack. No longer content with stiff joints and aching lungs, it begins to gnaw at the edges of your flesh itself. You held your boots, and the scene beneath your feet made your stomach tense up. Your skin pale and swollen, showing the cruel signs of frostbite for the first time. You twist your toes, longing for a feeling. There is some, but not enough. You want to know how many of them will obey you. Archaeological evidence indicates that winter sports have caused harm to corpses. Bone remains found in Norwegians' graves sometimes show signs of amputation, rough cuts on toes or fingers, which may be frostbite. The chronicler of the monastery also recorded the arrival of the attackers. Their limbs were blackened by the smoke, but they were still brandishing axes. Now you understand this cruel fact. Frostbite is not only common but also expected. There are also some disturbing anecdotes. It is said in folk tales that soldiers would bite their frozen fingers in an attempt to make the blood flow back. Imagine your hands are like bread, with the copper flavor of your own flesh and ice mixed together. This sounds absurd, but in a desperate march, even such extremes seem reasonable. Researchers still had differences on how to treat frostbite at that time. Some people believe that humans are completely dependent on the natural sting of fire and endure the pain of blood recovery. Others believe that applying moss or animal fat can prevent further damage to the skin. The truth may never be solved. Bones and legends seldom record the details of pain. Sensory experience is ruthless. Your feet alternated between silence and flames, now numb, now burning. The leather of the boots feels very hard and pierces the ankles like iron hoops. With every step you take, your legs will feel a sharp pain, sharper than any knife. Your fingers are no better either. They wore hard gloves, constantly in pain and couldn't grasp without much effort. You bend them until the tears sting your eyes, but the stiffness always creeps back. The air in the early morning smelled bitter, mixed with the thick smoke from last night's burning. It sticks to your mouth, mixed with the metallic smell of blood flowing from the cracked lip. If you habitually lick them, the salt will sting you and immediately freeze into sharp crystals. Even your breathing feels strange, creaking in your chest, just like the wind blowing through dry reading materials. By your side, the cost is obvious. A man was limping. His toes were so swollen that they couldn't fit into his boots. Another person wrapped the tattered cloth even tighter, groaning at the same time. The third person just stared at his pale and sallow fingers, as if unsure if they still belonged to him. It never stops. You left bloodstains on the snow, and the pale red flowers were quickly swallowed up by the white. The sound of suffering is unforgettable. The groans mingled with the creaking of the snow, creating a cold rhythm. The shield was swept dull, no longer proud, no longer provocative, but rather tired. Even the wind seems to be mocking you. It whistles sharply as if mocking your weakness. The wolves have left, but you almost miss them. At least their threat is real. This is cold, intangible and endless. In the evening glow, the pain became even more intense. The fingers slowly thawed. When the sensation returns, the toe burns. Every nerve is screaming. The men cursed and sobbed softly, biting their belts to cover up the sounds. So are you. The teeth sunk into the fur, savoring the smell of sweat and salt. Liberation is more painful than numbness, but at least it means life. There are also some rituals here. A soldier reached his frostbitten hand into his companion's stomach, stealing warmth from the flesh to the flesh. Another person smeared animal fat on their feet. It smelled bad, but the insulation was real. Someone smiled wryly and murmured, "In the mountains, only fat, fish and fire are the most important gods." You almost agreed. When a person drops fat into the fire and raises his feet above the smoke, the smell of burning fat fills the entire camp. It's spicy, greasy and stinky, but his sigh of relief tells you it works, even if only a little. You wrinkled your nose, but still drew closer, desperately seeking any way to temporarily relieve yourself. When you sit down and stare at your swollen toe, you realize that frostbite is more than just an injury. It is a kind of erosion, a constant refinement of oneself. From the mountain every day, the skin feels warm and cozy. The question is, how much can you lose before you are no longer complete? It's hard to fall asleep. My toes twitch under layers of wool and where fingers get stuck under my armpits. You promise yourself in a low voice that you will wake up, you will act, and you won't be the one abandoned. The cold may bite you, but you still have your own teeth. You will have a parade again tomorrow. The next morning, your frostbitten toes and stiff fingers hurt as you stand, but the parade won't wait. You lined up in a row, and the shield and the axe fell heavily on you again. However, despite the chapped skin and spasms in the joints, the soldiers still did some strange things. They began to practice. In this desolate and deep snow, hungry and with a bone-chilling wind, people formed a rough circle and raised their weapons. One detailed account in the Chronicle is that the Vikings often drilled during their expeditions, even on hostile lands. They practiced the shield wall and spear spikes, knowing that discipline like strength could keep them alive. What you are seeing now is people colliding with each other with shields. The sound is masked by the snow, but it is still very intense. The spear rhythmically thrust outward, forming a wall of spikes, even when there were no enemies in sight. This is an exhausting sport, but surprisingly invigorating, just like stretching stiff muscles after staying in the cold for too long. Even stranger was the simulated duel held in the winter camp. In folk tales, soldiers fight in pairs with blunt swords or even wooden sticks, mostly for their own entertainment rather than to hone their skills. Imagine wrecking through a blizzard for a whole day and then smiling as you hit your friend with a frozen branch. This feels absurd, but you can understand why. Laughter and action prevent despair from sinking deeper than the snow. Some researchers question whether these winter exercises are practical or merely romanticized exaggerations. Do soldiers really take the risk of precious energy in battle, or did the poets depict their ancestors as tireless people? The evidence is uncertain, which leads to different opinions among scholars. However, when you see people stomping their feet, shouting and punching and kicking, you know that this kind of practice is not a waste. It's about resistance. The sensory landscape of the drill bit is vivid. The shield collides with a dull thud, and each time you raise it, it vibrates on your arm. There was a smell of iron in the air, which was the fragrance wet on the lips. A strange mixture of salt and metal. Each exhalation would blur the air, swirling above the soldiers' heads like the steam ejected by war horses. The smell of damp leather and damp wool was everywhere, heady and sour, mixed with the faint smoke from the morning fire. Take your position in the circle and raise your axe. Your shoulder is screaming in pain, but the rhythm leads you forward. Step forward, sprint, step forward, swing. The creaking of boots in the snow weakened as people got the chance to shout short commands. Wall, push, persist. Their voices echoed through the mountains, though tired, still resounding unpowerful. You feel a sense of unity, the warmth that the singing brought you a few days ago. Holding the axe, your hand hurts very much. The handles around the fingers are numb. However, when you swing, heat flashes briefly in your muscles, reminding you that they are not dead yet. The blade whistled through the air, cutting off flakes of snow from the wind. You were panting heavily. The scarf around your mouth got wet from your breathing and froze in a moment. You're still pushing you. The surface of laughter. A man slipped in the snow and fell backward, his shield rustling on him. A burst of laughter broke out in the circle, even though another hand reached out to pull him up. Another soldier deliberately swung too wide, as exaggerated as a drunk performer, and his comrades booed. This absurd behavior can relieve the burden of marching more than any food. At the end of the drill, the soldiers fell onto their shields, panting unspitting clouds into the air. Nearby flames crackled and thick smoke billowed towards me. You sank too, your muscles trembling under your chest, rising and falling. Your body has been drained dry, but your spirit is surprisingly stable. Practicing combat in the snow is not about preparing for distant enemies. This is a reminder to yourselves that you are still warriors, not cold shells staggering forward. Later, when the camp quieted down, you replayed the training of the day in your mind. The sound of the shield colliding echoes in your ears like thunder. You can still feel a sharp pain in your palm from grasping too tightly and a burning sensation in your thigh from stepping on the snow. Strangely enough, you cherish it because at those moments, you are not just enduring, you are fighting, even if the enemy is invisible. You glanced at your comrades as if they had no dried fish or barley cakes. Their laughter gradually faded into the weary silence. Some people have already fallen asleep, propping themselves up with shields as pillows. Others thrust their spears at the fire, and the sparks rose and swirled like fleeting stars. You took a deep breath, milk and sweat overwhelming you with exhaustion. This mountain took away a lot of flesh, warmth and comfort, but today you have found something back: your identity. The drill proved that you are more than just trembling bodies. You are warriors bound by rhythm, laughter and stubbornness. Tomorrow, when the snow rises again, you will not only be survivors but also those who remember who you are. The march was getting longer and longer, and the nights were getting colder and colder, but this team was still struggling forward. But not all the people who come here are soldiers. Tonight, when the fire crackles and you are hungry, you notice the women and men walking among you. Their existence is relatively quiet and less recorded in legendary stories, but they are indispensable. Survival does not solely depend on soldiers. It depends on every hand willing to work. One detail confirmed by contemporary chronicles is that Viking expeditions were often accompanied by followers and camps. Women, servants, and enslaved people provided the work of cooking, mending and transporting, enabling the soldiers to maintain their strength. Now you can clearly see that one person is bending down and stirring a thin pot of stew over the fire, while the other is kneeling on the ground, mending a torn boot with tinder. Without them, the war band would have collapsed under the weight of their own demands. From the fragments of the legend, we can see a strange one. Sometimes women would carry small iron pots that had been hung from herd animals. These pots were considered very valuable and would be worth the ransom if lost. When you watch a woman hold up such a pot blackened by fire, you can almost imagine her bargaining with her enemy. It is almost absurd to treat cooking utensils as treasures. But in this cold world, warm stews are more valuable than gold. Some experts are still debating the exact roles of these followers. Are women really equal partners in elections? Or is it only during long parades that they are regarded as necessities? Did the slaves serve voluntarily or under constant threats? There are very few written materials, leading many points that need to be explained. You can be sure that when the pot passes by tonight, no one will complain and the air is filled with steam. The sensory world of camp life changes with their appearance. What you smell is not the stench of sweat and leather, but the flavor of the broth. It is simmering slowly. Barley and fish are mixed with wild vegetables collected from the valley below. Their sharp smell masks the odor of damp wool. The crackling of the firewood and the bubbling of the stew mingle together. A soothing sound like any song. Pick up a cup with ox horns and sip it carefully. Warmth immediately spread, burning your tongue but soothing your chest. The taste is plain earthy, and the salty barley softens into a paste. And hydrate the dried fish until it splits open. However, after several days of chewing the bark and a strict diet, it felt like a feast. Use eyes, let the steam roll up on your face, and be grateful for the labor of those hands that will never be praised in the legend. By your side, a woman's movements are very steady. A person Rame Ines bandaged the soldier's hand with fresh wool strips, muttering about frostbite. Another person sharpened the needle and thread over the fire, preparing to mend the cracked seam on the cloak. The conversation was low but continuous, in contrast to the silence of those who were too exhausted to speak. From time to time, you hear laughter, gentle yet swift, as if the cold cannot quench every spark of humor. Monkeys work without claws. One was carrying firewood, with his shoulders bent by the heavy logs. Another kind of caning fish, with a pungent smell, its scales flickering in the firelight, is then thrown aside. Their movements are very efficient and almost mechanical. However, there was something lingering in their silence. You wonder if their minds will drift to their long-lost homeland, to the shackles that they cannot escape even in the snow. The sounds of them might blend into a rhythm, with stews bubbling, sewing needles clicking, and wood crackling in the fire. It is a kind of music for survival, unknown yet indispensable. You took a deep breath, inhaling the broth and smoke, and realized how much you relied on these quiet figures. The soldiers brandished their axes, but this was an intangible labor that prevented their bodies from exhaustion. A soldier whispered a joke and raised a horn to pay tribute to the cook. Laughter echoed among the crowd, but soon it turned into exhaustion. You took the last sip of the broth, licked the saltness on your lips, and felt as if life had returned to your limbs. Later, as the fire in the fire gradually died out, you noticed a woman carefully mending a boot by the light of the fire. The leather was hard and stiff. However, her work pace is steady, and the sound of the thread piercing through the skin is like the whisper of snow. The warrior with the boots gnawed beside him, completely unaware of it. You watched her sew the needle and tie it up, then smiled slightly. That quiet moment, unrecorded and unpraised, was as weighty as any wall. Scholars may continue to debate their roles, but the truth here is obvious. Without these companions, the march would be unsteady. Their labor is the intangible pillar of their survival. When you pull the cloak tighter, the warm taste of the stew still lingers, and you feel a sense of gratitude swelling in your chest. The mountains have carried so much, but tonight they have given you this, reminding you that survival is never the work of a single force. When winter wants to take you away, axes, hands, fire and strings are all equal. The fire in the stove had burned out, and morning came with the gurgling of hunger. The throat feels dry again, but hunger masks your thirst. The stew from the previous night has become a memory. Another march without food won't hurt you more than frostbite. The supply has decreased. Now this warforce not only has to rely on what they carry, but also on what they can find along the way or bargain. According to the chronicles of that time, Viking warriors stayed in remote villages or transferred stations to trade goods, even during battles. Ironware tools, beads and salt were often used to exchange for bread, cheese or dried meat. The reason is easy to imagine. Marching ceaselessly in the snow consumes more physical strength than any battle, and replenishing food is as urgent as tempering steel. What you see now is a group of people approaching a mountain village. From the chimney of a longhouse half miners buried in the snow, faint smoke is rising gently. There are still some even stranger phenomena. A legend mentions that warriors exchanged combs carved from bones or fragments of walrus husks for barter. A strange choice, as a decoration for survival food. However, when local farmers need tools just as soldiers need calories, combs may be more valuable than coins. This thought makes you giggle foolishly. Imagine raiding a comb for a piece of cheese. Both sides are convinced that they have got a better deal. Explanations for the level of peace in these meetings vary greatly from party to party. Some scholars believe that most trade is straightforward and emerges out of need and mutual respect in harsh circumstances. Others, however, believe that the line between trade and plundering is constantly blurring, sometimes through negotiations and sometimes through force. Here, the difference might only depend on how desperate the band is. Botta's sensory details are vivid. The village was filled with the smell of firewood and goats, a welcome change compared to the musk of sweat and leather. When the door opened, the long house creaked, giving off a warm and fresh smell of bread, making your stomach tense up painfully. Inside, you can hear the haggling voices of cautious farmers and those with shiny axes hanging at their waists. During the exchange process, you tasted the saltness of the dried fish pressed in your palm. Its meat is very chewy and salty, but after a few days of plain barley, it becomes very delicious. Your tongue is intoxicated by it, even though you know the taste is fleeting. Another person was chewing a large piece of goat cheese, and the air was filled with a sour musk smell that made one's mouth water. A pot of thin beer was passed on, and its yeast foam was slightly bubbling. You took a sip, and the bitterness pierced through the metallic dryness in your mouth. The voices of bargaining never ceased. The coins jingled, although more often there were no coins in commodity exchanges. Belts, iron knives, bone combs, and salt blots were all placed there like treasures. When the soldiers fought hard for more, their voices rose and fell, sometimes calm and sometimes sharp. A farmer was pulling a goat forward. The goat let out a protesting cry, and people burst into laughter at the stubbornness of this animal. There is also tension. The farmer's gaze lingered on the warrior's sword for too long. Both hands were hovering near the handle of the axe, not raised but ready. You sensed the change in the air, filled with the possibility of violence. But this moment passed and the deal was closed. The soldiers left with bundles of bread and bacon. The villagers were holding beads and iron tools. There is no blood on the snow today. Keep moving forward. Food is shared in moderation. A piece of bread crust was torn into pieces and passed from one hand to the other. The air was filled with the smell of smoked meat. People chewed the meat strips slowly, savoring the rare delicacy. You pick up your share, press it to your lips and sigh for the fragrance that bursts forth. Even stale bread is softer than frozen bread, and every bite can rejuvenate you. Not everything is pleasant. Some people do a poor job of bartering, getting fermented milk in return, which is so sour that it makes one's stomach freeze. Some people are still chewing with bared teeth, but waste is intolerable. A few people chuckled to themselves, joking that the milk tasted like it had been squeezed out of a long miner's dead goat. Laughter alleviated the pain, although the smell lingered for a long time. As you move forward, you realize how fragile the food supply on the island is and that it won't last forever. The next village may not be so willing or may not exist at all. Survival depends not only on endurance but also on constant exchange. Food for iron, beads for bread, and small accessories for life. When we set up camp that night, our stomachs were a little fuller and our moods were a bit more relaxed. More freely, and the voices of stories rose. A scalded person recited the story of Odin raiding one eye for wisdom, and the irony in it did not fade away. Trade seems as old as a myth and as costly as it is. You took the last sip of beer. The bitter taste warmed your chest, and the firelight soothed your soul. There might be hunger again tomorrow, but for now, this group of people have been bargaining from the mountain for a whole day. In this endless cold march, one day's victory is enough. So far, the military band has realized that if they are to continue marching, every pain, every wound, and every cracked lip needs to be watched out for. Tonight's fire scene was not filled with drills and songs, but with slow and composed physical nurturing. The men took off their boots and hard gloves to check for any damage. The air was not only filled with the smell of smoke and broth, but also with the sense of sweat, miners' soaked wool, animal fat and ground herbs among the stones. Archaeological discoveries strongly suggest that the Vikings had surprisingly simple medical knowledge. Birch bark fragments with traces of preservatives, bones showing signs of surgical healing, and even the remnants of the herbetic uses all tell us that these people are not ignorant wanderers. You see it now. A person chewed on the bark of a willow tree, smiling wryly at its bitterness, knowing that it could relieve pain, just like medicine centuries later. There is still a strange note preserved in love. Some soldiers applied cheap fat mixed with moss to cracked skin, believing that the moss could drive away frost and the fat could keep warm. This mixture gave off the stench of decaying grass, but you watched it spread on the blistered feet, and the patient moaned in pain and relief. Although it looked strange, no one laughed at it. Here, even the most absurd remedial measures are a lifeline. Scholars still have differences of opinion on how formal this medical knowledge is. Is there a designated healer in the war group who has received herbal training? Or is the treatment temporary and passed down from the elderly to the young? The evidence is uneven, leaving room for speculation. But whether it was tradition or helplessness, the care continued, and the men lived another night. The sensory details are intense. Is it by the stove and open a bag of dried herbs? The air was filled with the pungent smell of yarrow and thyme. It can penetrate the sour smell of damp wool, refreshing the eyes and ears. The hissing sound of melting fat in the pot mingled with the crackling sound of burning wood. On this cruel land, this is a strange family voice. You took a deep breath, inhaling both the stench and the comfort, for both meant life. When you unfasten the wool band that is binding your hand will also hurt. The skin beneath is chapped, pale and rough. Comrade hands you a paste made by mixing rosin and honey. Its texture is very sticky and uncomfortable, but when you apply it to a wound, the stinging sensation will slightly subside. You licked your lips and tasted the lingering sweetness on your fingers mixed with the pungent smell of resin. Strange medicine, but it works. Around you, the camp has turned into a clinic. Aim placed his feet beside the fire, and as the blood returned to his blackened tongues, he shrank back. Another person's arm was tied with fine linen picked up from a torn coat. This piece of cloth has become hard due to dry blood. The sound was filled with moans, murmuring prayers, and the steady rhythm of stones crushing herbs into powder. You see a slave pressing a warm stone against a soldier's chest to relieve his cough. The smell of dense oil rose from the heated rocks, blending with the ubiquitous smoke. A woman was humming a tune softly while sewing her wound with silk thread. Each puncture can be heard, followed by a gentle tearing sound, and then the sound of the rope being pulled. The soldier gritted his teeth, and the sweat on his forehead froze immediately. Just looking at it makes you tremble. Despite being cold-hearted, humor also emerged. Ein smeared fat on his split lips and grinned to announce that he was ready to kiss Freya herself. Laughter rippled, brief and rough, but it eased the heavy air. Another person joked that the moss pros made him smell better than before, which drew a burst of scoffs from those who were close enough. As the night deepened, the fire in the stone blazed fiercely. Every time the resin was thrown into the glow, the flame will burn higher and higher. A thick and sweet smoke lingers in your nostrils, carrying the scent of the pine forest far at the foot of the mountain. Lush your eyes and imagine them. Warm sunlight slanted in through the tall trees. The ground was softened by the needle. When someone nearby coughs loudly, your vision will disappear, but it will leave a brief warmth in your chest. You leaned back in the chair, your hands wrapped in bandages, stiff but not so painful. Your toes are still hurting, but they are now wrapped up. You believe in the warmth of fire and will. Around you, men look even more like humans, with patches, with care, with bruises, but very complete. At that moment the band didn't look like soldiers, but rather exhausted family members sitting around the fireplace. Scholars may forever debate whether the Vikings moved forward with healers or merely improvised. But when you lie down, your hands are indignant and your tongue is still smeared with honey, you will know the truth of tonight. Survival is not only the collision of steel, but also the art of care. Without cacti, without fat, without moss and honey, no one will swing an axe tomorrow. You close your eyes. Smoke wraps around you like a second cloak, drifting into an uneasy dream. The smell of herbs lingers on, reminding you that even in the coldest weather, your body can be pulled back from the edge, even if it's just another day. When the band left the camp again, the air was heavier than before. To be precise, it's not colder but heavier, as if a mountain is pressing down on you, testing your spirit and body. The men moved in silence, their breaths hissing through the cold scarves. But when this line stops on the ridge, you will notice something unusual. Several soldiers knelt on the ground and took out a small bundle of things from their backpacks. Talismans, amulets, sticks engraved with runes. The ritual of survival has begun. One detail that archaeologists often notice is that the frequency of carved talismans was very high in the tombs and camps of the Vikings. Short inscriptions carved on wood, bones or antlers sometimes carry words of protection or prayer. What you are seeing now is a man touching the edge of a rune staffed with his thumb, his lips whispering. His voice almost vanished in the wind, but his eyes were filled with concentration. There is a strange story hidden in the legend. Sometimes soldiers would tie small bones or even fragments of animal teeth to their belts as a symbol of protection. You glanced at a comrade whose rope had a piece of a fox's jawbone hanging on it. With every step it took, its weight. Compared to the weight of his axe, it was ridiculously small, but he often touched it, as if its strength did not lie in size but in belief. Researchers still have differences over the literal meaning of these rituals. Some people insist that these charms have profound religious purposes, while others believe that they are more symbolic reminders of family or status rather than true magic. This debate has never been resolved, just like whether God really walks on these mountains. But for you, seeing the exhausted man muttering to the wooden bones, it's obvious that belief itself is the fuel. Sensory details become sharp in the ceremony. The fire crackled faintly, and the smoke rose in a wisp, forming a thin stream. The resin was thrown into the flame, releasing a sharp rosin that mingled with the musk of wood and leather. The runes carved on the branches briefly glowed when the sparks leapt, and their edges caught the light before returning to shadow. You took a deep breath, and the resin pricked your nose, leaving a bitter taste of juice on your tongue. The sound tonight is rather quiet. There are no songs, no vulgar jokes, only murmuring odes. A warrior rhythmically tapped his shield with 2 fingers, producing a low and steady beat. Another one hummed, his voice rambling but steady enough to weave a pattern in the night. The rhythm of this combination has a hypnotic effect, making you sway slightly even when you are sitting. You close your eyes and feel the warmth of the flames on your skin. The cold wind tries to steal it away. Your fingers have captured your own charm. We haven't touched the small pendant of Thor's hammer for several days. It clung coldly to your palm, more meaningful than ever before. You muttered a few words, not sure if this was prayer or a habit. Every syllable is filled with the smell of smoke. Some rituals are almost strange. Someone sprinkled me in the snow. This is the wine offered to the mountain spirit. The other one carved a rune on the ice surface. Then spit at it and sealed his vow with his breath. The third person added a small piece of red cloth to his spearhead, claiming that it could drive away the frost spirit. The scene was almost comical, but no one laughed. Faith, no matter how strange it may be,